So hi, everyone, and welcome to another one of our thematic webinars for the Efficiency for Access Design Challenge. Today, we'll be hearing about humanitarian contexts from our industry experts. So before we begin, I just want to go over some housekeeping. As usual, I'm recording this webinar and its transcript, which will be available online in the usual space. I'll put it up on CrowdSolve in our forum space. So any post-event resources, anything like that will be shared there as well. So keep an eye on that space. If you do not wish to be recorded, please remember to turn off your video and or mute yourself, and we'll share the recording and slides following the event. So when you have a question, feel free to come off mute, turn your video on. It's just to avoid any distractions while we have the speakers going. So here is the agenda today. And I don't know if you've seen, if you were in the waiting room, but I just pasted the link to a Mentimeter poll. So just while we're going through these opening things, if you can go in there and fill in that opening question, that'll just give us a good idea of what everyone's coming to this webinar with. Yeah, and we're trying out a little bit of a different format today. So rather than full presentations all the way, we'll be having a short introductory presentation followed by the bulk of the session, which will be dedicated to a panel discussion as well as Q&A. So if you just click, once you finish that opening question on Mentimeter, if you just click through, you'll be able to put in any of your Q&A questions on there. And you can put those in throughout the session and we'll pull those up at the end. Otherwise, feel free to send them in over the chat or raise your hand when the time comes. Okay, so I don't want to hold things up too long. Here's the Mentimeter poll. If you didn't see it in the waiting room, and I'll just go on there in just a second. So let me just leave that up for a second. The question asks, what are some keywords you think of when you think of humanitarian contexts? And just to get an idea of where you're all coming from. Okay. We'll get a response here. I might come back to this at the end of the presentations as well. But please remember to fill this in before we get started so we know what your baseline is. And I'll check on this while we're going through. Does everybody have that link? If you don't, just let me know in the chat. Okay. I know those questions take a few minutes, so I think I'll just roll things along and we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. But yeah, just let me know if you have any trouble with that. Remember to fill it out before the presentation, though. So there we go. Phillip and Joelle are joining us today, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves. I don't want to take up too much time. I tend to blab on if I start introducing. So why don't you two introduce yourselves, or do you want me to move on to the presentation now? You can do it.
Let's do a little introduction now. It's probably best. Sorry, I'm talking, so I'll go first. Sorry, Joelle. So hi, everyone. My name's Dr. Phillip Sandwell. I work for an organization called the Global Platform for Action for Sustainable Energy in Displacement Settings, which is based at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we shorten it to the GPA, based at UNITAR. So our goal is to achieve SDG 7 in displacement settings. So amongst our organization, there's myself, Joelle, and about 15 other colleagues that are working on various aspects of this topic. Bit about my background. So I previously worked for an NGO called Practical Action, working on energy in humanitarian settings. I also worked as a postdoc at Imperial College London in the UK, researching energy system modeling, normally solar mini-grids in these kind of contexts in developing countries, and my PhD focused on the same thing. So most of my work now focuses on the techno-economic analysis of kind of different energy solutions in displacement settings that I'll tell you a lot more about in the presentation. But before I get to that, let's pass over to Joelle.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Phil. Yes, my name is Joelle Hangi, and also I work at the GPA, as Phil just mentioned, as inclusivity specialist. So my work is mainly focusing on making sure that the space, which is the humanitarian energy space, is more inclusive, and I also have a lot of input when it comes to the refugee perspective on different interventions that are taking place in displacement settings. But before joining the GPA, I also worked with UNHCR and also other international organizations in different capacities, including communication. So yeah, thank you so much for having me here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you both for joining us. It's really great to meet you, and I'm sure the students will have plenty of questions for you at the end. Thank you for joining us. So Phil, I'll start the presentation if that's okay. Can you just tell me when to move on?
Sure. Cool. Hi everyone. We've already done introductions, so you can move on already. Just as a kind of quick overview, Sean's kind of already said a lot of this already, but first up, I'll give some a kind of like really high level overview of what energy means in displacement settings, a few different examples of energy access issues in those kind of contexts, and then we'll have some Q&A. Just before we move on, actually, when I say displacement settings, like there's lots of quite specific language that's used around these kind of contexts. So depending on the exact situation, it might include refugees or displaced people or internally displaced people or displacement affected communities. For the purpose of kind of our discussion here at kind of the highest level, you know, the context you can think of are people that have been forced to move their home or move away from the place where they live for you know, a range of different reasons. They could be fleeing conflicts, looking for safety, maybe it's natural disasters, but essentially been forced to move from their home to somewhere else. Perhaps they crossed the border or perhaps not. We can go into kind of lots of details about specific contexts too, but you know, they have their own kind of considerations. So I'll kind of take a zoomed out look right now, and then in the Q&A, maybe we can jump into some more specific stuff. Okay, yeah, Sean, move on, please. Cool. So I'll give the brief introduction. If you could move ahead again. So when we talk about displacement settings around the world, it's important to know about the kind of scale of this challenge. So from your backgrounds, maybe you kind of know the scale of the energy access challenge, which, you know, plus or minus is around 750 million people that don't have access to electricity, and around, I think it's around 2 billion or so that don't have access to clean cooking. If we just focus down on the other side of kind of our equation, which is the displacement settings, in 2022, the estimate was there was around 100 million displaced people worldwide. So, and that's obviously a huge number. And if you compare that to, you know, a country, that's like still quite a large one, a population of 100 million people, of course, spread around many different countries and many different continents. But in total, it's still a huge population that is kind of affected by these issues. I said previously that there are, you know, people that have crossed borders, which normally have the status of refugees, people that have been moved around within their own country, which might be internally displaced people. But all in all, it adds up to around 100 million people. If you look on the map on the right, you can see some of the kind of major situations, they're often called, by UNHCR, and kind of the countries of origin of those people. So, you know, just taking a quick look at the map, a lot of these issues are kind of present in like throughout sub-Saharan Africa and also South Asia. And then an example I'll give later as well is the situation in Bangladesh too. So within that, there's a huge diversity of contexts, even within the same continent. There's obviously a huge range of different situations and different countries being affected. So obviously it's terrible that there's the scale of this challenge, but it means there's lots of different kind of challenges that hopefully you'll be able to address some solutions for. Next, please. Yeah, and if you just click through all the animations, there we go. So overall, the world's making pretty good progress towards SDG 7, but unfortunately, it's not true for displacement settings. So one of the reasons why the GPA was formed about 5 years or so ago was because people didn't really have a handle on what the energy access situation was in these kind of contexts. Like we just didn't know, we didn't have the amount of information to kind of be able to put numbers to these kind of statistics. So a lot of work has gone in over the past 5 years and it's progressing really well. But something we're learning is that actually we're taking 2 steps forward and then 3 steps backwards. The issue is that we're making progress in terms of increasing energy access in some displacement settings, but the overall number of displaced people is rising, and it's rising faster than the progress we're making with sustainable energy. So compared to, if we compare 2014 and 2020, these are all estimates, but essentially we're becoming more aware that there's even more work to do. There's lots of really great projects that are coming through that are really successful, but they're just not meeting the increase in the number of displaced people around the world. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's good. So we'll now give some kind of more like practical examples of what energy access means. I've talked about it pretty generally so far, but what does it mean to a person in one of these situations? So yeah, if you click to the next slide. So probably the main energy access issue that people will tell you about in these kind of contexts is cooking. So sorry, I should say the way we kind of normally divide up energy access in this kind of setting is energy for cooking, which is kind of what you see on the screen right now, energy for lighting and other kind of like basic services in households, and then a few others that I'll get onto in a second. But the kind of number one concern of most people is cooking. It's something you do every day. It's something that is typically not particularly well provided for in these kind of contexts. Again, I'll be speaking in generalities, but in a lot of settlements or camps, they're very densely populated. Resources are scarce. So if you require firewood for cooking, maybe you have to travel quite far away in order to collect it because there isn't enough in the local area, because also there's lots of people around. Maybe that has some issues with the kind of local host community. So when we say host community, that's the kind of when people move into an area, the kind of people that were there already, generally speaking, called like the host community. So maybe because people are now, they want the same resources, maybe there's some source of conflict there. And that's before you get to the point of actually cooking with firewood, for example. Like it's, if you're using firewood on a really basic stove, it produces huge amounts of smoke. It produces lots of kind of indoor air pollution, which has a huge negative impact on people's health. And like being specific, when we say people, like typically that means women, and it means children and girls that are most affected by indoor air pollution. This is a huge issue around the world, but particularly in displacement contexts. And that's one of the reasons why we as the GPA and our partners, we advocate for clean cooking solutions. So that could be cleaner fuels like LPG, or it could be things like electric cooking. Thinking about the context of this challenge, there's lots of very cool cooking devices coming out that are, super efficient electric cookers that can be really well tailored to people's specific cooking needs, because it's something that's very personal, to people or to, certain communities, the kind of food they want to eat. So the kind of really efficient devices that can hopefully be powered by electricity could be a really cool opportunity for a design challenge. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So, and this is just some of this in context. So this is actually one of the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh. You can see the difference between 2017 and the 2 slides from 2018. These are all taken from the same place. So you can see the huge impact this has on the local environment, as well as, the people that are cooking. So huge amount of deforestation. There's things like landslides and flooding because all the trees have been taken away, and also the local elephant population. There was like conflicts with their kind of migratory routes as well. So it's both people and the environment that's being affected. Next, please. Thinking about some other kind of examples of energy use in displacement settings. Sometimes one of the only reliable places with electricity in these kind of contexts is the health center. So humanitarian organizations will often have their own kind of diesel generators, which are, used to run, the humanitarian operations like health centers, maybe schools, their offices, things like that, normally not extended to the population's households. But it means in, sometimes quite modest healthcare settings within some of these contexts, there's all kinds of devices that are being used. If your screen's big enough, you can probably read off some of these medical procedures that are listed there. Obviously, these require electricity. And imagine trying to perform any kind of surgery, childbirth, whatever, in the dark at night, like with a phone, with your phone light because the power's off. I don't know if any of you have kind of backgrounds in medical device design, but I'm sure there's lots of really cool opportunities there for kind of more efficient medical devices that could be powered either more efficiently from one of these diesel generators, like you can see on the top right, or if such thing could be powered by like a solar panel or battery, that could be a real game changer. Next, please. Yeah, here's another classic example of this is a solar project, I think, in a school. So there's it's a bit of a misrepresentative before and after. You can tell they're not the same school, but it tells the right picture. So you can see on the left, very basic, very modest room. I think that's probably the nicest way of saying it. And on the right, you have there's I think it's a school or a community center that's now full of tablets that people can use to access really basic things like accessing the internet. Maybe it's for education, maybe it's just to connect with the rest of the world. That's only available by through access to electricity and the powering that router, and access to education and the kind of appliances that can help sort that could also be a really cool challenge to try and tackle. Next, please. Yeah, here's another funner example, like giving a presentation to a room full of engineers. Public lighting is another big issue in a lot of these settings. So typically, these places might be far away from the national grid. There's no street lighting. Maybe the roads aren't in particularly good condition. Maybe the camp itself is in a more precarious location. It means moving around at night could be really dangerous. Maybe it's just walking on the street. Maybe it's going to kind of like the latrines, stuff like that. So public lighting is a really big challenge. Solar street lights, like the kind you can see here, which have a pretty simple solar panel, battery, kind of floodlight setup, can be very effective at solving this. And making a solar street light that is both effective and efficient and tamper-proof is a really interesting challenge. Unfortunately, we also need your engineering expertise to make sure they're installed correctly, because as you can see, these two solar panels at 90 degrees to each other, one's being shaded by a tree, not the greatest implementation. Good idea, not so great execution. Next, please. Yeah, and if you just hold it on this one. So by now you're probably wondering, why is this such an issue? This isn't new. Like, unfortunately, people have been displaced for a very long time. Shouldn't people be doing things about it? One of the challenges we have is that the humanitarian system is organized around something called the cluster system. So there's a series of kind of humanitarian issues that are shown on the screen now, the kind of blue ones that are seen as kind of the core tenets of how you do humanitarian response. So things like, to pick a few, like health, logistics, nutrition, protection, shelter, these core issues that are overseen by a specific agency or agencies that has responsibility. You might see that energy is not one of those. So energy doesn't have a kind of formal home within this kind of humanitarian administrative system. So it's something that cuts across all of these different issues. Like, imagine doing any of these without access to energy. But it means that each one is kind of responsible for its own energy use, whatever that means in its context, which means there's a lack of coordination. It means that, people who are excellent at whatever healthcare provision are going to be thinking first and foremost about, how you provide really great healthcare, and then secondarily the power that powers it. Which means that energy provision can be a bit disjointed. It can be unfunded, and it just makes the whole challenge a lot harder. So if you just click through again, what this means in all these different cluster contexts, like I won't won't read them out, but maybe these are just some ideas that you can look through, either in the Q&A now or when you hopefully look back at this presentation. These are some of the key issues that are kind of aligned with these cluster systems, but still kind of like on the fringes of it, which means we actually need to put in more effort to make sure those kind of needs are satisfied beyond just the basic minimum, or sometimes no minimum at all. So for example, for the education cluster, that could mean lighting and power in schools. For camp coordination and management, maybe that's power for humanitarian logistics. For health, maybe it's like low emissions cookings, because if that's going to be a huge impact on people's health, you can get the prevention rather than the cure, for example. And for shelter, people being safe in their homes, maybe that means efficient solar lights or public street lighting, things like that. Okay, I kind of want to leave this up on the screen just for a little bit longer, just so people can kind of reflect on some of the ideas, but hopefully you've had some time to read that. So yeah, let's click through. I think the next slide is just saying like, let's go to Q&A. If you're interested in our work, like all the links are here. Obviously we have some time for Q&A now, but please do follow us online. There's lots of great resources that can give you some cool ideas for your projects. But yeah, ultimately, thanks very much. So for the Q&A, it will be Joelle and I doing a double act. So I think essentially, if you'd like to know things about kind of technologies, then probably I'm your guy. And if you'd like to know things about people and how you design for people, then you should probably ask Joelle. So yeah, thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Phil. That's really great. And I will share the slides with everyone post-event, so you can look through those green boxes, especially on that last slide, and look through them in more detail. Okay, cool. I think that will bring us on to the Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see us all. And I'll bring up the questions. So I had prepared a few questions as well, but please feel free to put any questions you might have on the chat or that Mentimeter that I shared in the beginning. For anyone who's joined since then, I'll put the link in the chat again so that you can fill in the Q&A there if you want to. But let me start with my questions. I wanted to allow some time for you all to hear a bit about how to incorporate this into your own designs and incorporate this into the challenge. And first off, I just wanted to ask Phil, what are some humanitarian contexts most in need of innovations and off-grid solutions to help our students think through where they can have a starting point?
Sure. Geographically, we can start to think of some. So I showed the example of the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh. There's some very cool projects coming out of there. Like the situation there is, and as in many, is we call it protracted, which essentially means that it's no longer considered an emergency, but it's kind of a long-term situation. It's probably the nicest way of saying it. So there's lots of cool projects around cooking. There's been lots of LPG projects, and I think there's been a few kind of like electric cooking projects there. I think it's fair to say that the bulk of the work, though, that we look at is in sub-Saharan Africa. So in terms of country contexts, Kenya, well, Joelle's the expert. But in Kenya, there's lots of projects going on. There's mini grid projects being run in a few of the camps in Kenya. Uganda has a very favorable policy towards refugees, and that kind of spills over into kind of the policies towards energy access too. So there's kind of lots of potential there. Rwanda, for a country of modest size, has also seen lots of very interesting projects. Disclaimer, I also worked on some projects there. So in terms of, if you're thinking about the kind of geographical range of these projects, there's a few kind of like candidate countries that have seen a lot more attention than others. But I would say that if the audience is from a certain country and they're aware of the displacement situation in their own country, I would certainly encourage you to look into the solutions that could be done there. Something that we really encourage is kind of local problem solving to kind of local issues, because, you know, who understands the context best than someone who's based in that country and kind of understands the landscape and kind of what people need most directly.
Yeah, I think that's a thread that appears throughout the challenges, being aware of the people that you hope to impact and their needs. And I was just thinking it might be helpful for both of you if you see a bit about what the students think of when they think of humanitarian context. Before I just ask the second question, and thanks for that direction, Phil, on who to ask each question to. I thought I'd share a few of the words that the students are sharing that they think of when thinking of humanitarian context. So they're unity, dignity, education, hygiene, people, what is good for humans, problems, and helping. Maybe these give you a little bit of insight where the students are coming from. In the meantime, let me come back to our questions, and I wanted to ask Joelle, what do you think are the key considerations when designing for often diverse humanitarian contexts that Phillip was sharing?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for the question. And also, Phil, thank you so much for responding to the first question, which anticipates somehow this question. While designing any products that you probably think of making sense in, especially in the humanitarian context, one of the things that I find mostly key to have in mind is, first of all, to understand the local and the national context of that place, because to some extent, having a kind of broad understanding of the context that you are thinking of, it's really a key to have while designing any project or products that will make sense in that kind of context. And talking about context at the national level, but also at the local level, there is that difference when it comes to dynamics and operations and even policy coming in. So it's really important to have that in mind while designing any projects. But also the other thing is a clear understanding of the need, because to some extent designers or developers think on their own probably ideal products out that could make sense in a certain context. But surprisingly, when it comes to the humanitarian context, the situation is totally different from one place to the other, and even within one country or even one region, that the situation is totally different and the need of people is different. And also, as Phil mentioned, the situation of displacement contexts mostly comes, it's really places where, we have good number of people and mostly coming from different places. So the culture, there is the culture difference, there is a lot of things to consider. So having that deep understanding of the need of the people and how people operate and the entire context of that setup would definitely be a key when it comes to designing any product or even any project that will make sense in that particular context. Yeah.
Thanks, Joelle. That's really helpful. And I think I'll come back on that point of understanding that context in just a second. But I wanted to ask Phil, how important the wider context, such as policy and regulation in a given country or region, is when designing a solution.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. They're pretty critical. It's really important to know, how the policy landscape of a certain country will impact what kind of solutions you can design. So, I mean, of course, you want to comply with all the legal frameworks, things like that. That should go without saying. But when it comes to humanitarian context specifically, maybe there are rules or regulations around, who can access, who can go into these kind of settlements, for example. Like sometimes they are maybe not accessible to people outside the camp. There's not free movement in and out. In other places, they're completely open. It just so happens that people who are displaced live in this area, but it's kind of like a town, the same as any other. I would say that the most important consideration when it comes to kind of designing these kinds of appliances as part of this challenge, you should look at the kind of national policies towards what they define energy access as. So, for example, like if there's something called the multi-tier framework, which might or might not be familiar with, which is energy access isn't just a kind of yes/no thing. It's actually on a scale that we measure using something called the multi-tier framework, from 0, which means kind of no energy access, to 5, which is probably the kind of energy access that we have right now, you know, unrestricted, completely reliable power. And most countries have a definition of what energy access means that is somewhere on this scale. Normally it's kind of level 1 or 2. I won't go into the definitions now, but it's a pretty basic level, but there's kind of technical guidelines that you have to surpass in order to kind of tick that box. So anyway, in order to, oh, thanks, Sean, I just seen you put it in the chat. So in order to kind of design an appliance that will actually, like, you know, get government support, it's really important to make sure that you meet or exceed these guidelines, because otherwise, if you go to a government stakeholder and say, we have a great appliance, we'd like to roll it out, they'll say, sorry, it doesn't meet our criteria, we can't do that. So I'd say that's probably the #1 definition. Like, whichever geographical focus you look at, make sure that you see, like, does that country have a definition for what, you know, what energy access is, and whatever you design meets or exceeds that threshold.
And yes, I've just put in a little resource on what the multi-tier framework is in chat. And if you're watching the recording, I'll put that in the public resources. Great. Okay. And I think we've established that it's really important to understand the context that you're operating in. And Joelle really highlighted that as well. So I wanted to ask Phil, how does one find out that specific context or the conditions of a particular humanitarian setting? Yeah, if you could take that away.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a few resources that are available. Sometimes they're harder to find than others. So when it comes to kind of energy access issues in general, and also humanitarian energy access, there's a really great resource called Energypedia. So that is kind of, it's like Wikipedia, but for energy access, and there's lots of resources about humanitarian settings. It's kind of the place where organizations that have done work will kind of put, they'll put their reports, they'll put their kind of data and stuff on there most commonly, and lots of great webinars on there too. Thanks, Sean, just seen the link in the chat. The downside is that often it's a bit hard to find the exact kind of technical regulations that, you know, you'll need to comply with. Normally these are available online somewhere, kind of country dependent. There is often a kind of national governing body for standards or regulations, which will be able to provide some kind of information. So, you know, most of my background's kind of in East Africa, and generally the countries there are quite good at putting up their technical specifications of, if you're designing, like, for example, if you're designing a solar home system, you know, what how many hours of power per day it needs to provide, like what its wattage or its kind of, you know, technical capacities need to be. And you know, other important things when designing these kind of things are like warranties and, you know, making sure you have like guarantees. That stuff is normally available on the kind of local government's kind of Bureau of Standards. Sometimes it's available on their like Ministry of Energy sites. Normally there's a kind of like most countries will have their Ministry of Energy, and then they'll have a page on their site which is all about either rural electrification or about off-grid solutions. And those are the kind of technical regulations or technical information that will also apply in displacement contexts too.
Thanks. And I think no matter what context you're going to plan on designing for, those are all really good takeaways to think of and consider when you're researching your solutions. And yeah, I would agree that Energypedia is a really good resource for you to dive into. So always make sure to refer back there and see if there's anything that you can use. Okay, I have a question for you both. Maybe Joelle could go first, and then Phil could take it on, just so you can have a little bit of a breather. What are the general challenges and opportunities of ensuring energy access in a humanitarian setting?
That's a really interesting question. And really so happy to be the first to respond to that, and feel free to come in. Yeah, definitely. When it comes to challenges, of course, in one way or another, Phil has mentioned a few challenges. One being the policy. Sometimes when it comes to the country itself and rule and regulations, there are places that you can't enter or you can't access easily because the policy doesn't allow you to operate or even have access to that place. So that can be one of the challenges that people can face when it comes to accessing places where displaced people live. The other points also to mention, which is somehow related to the presentation that Phil give some explanation on, what is the fact that the provision of energy in displacement settings doesn't stand as one of the cluster, as he mentioned, and unfortunately, that's being the case. We don't have like a lot of fundings that are there available for that particular aspect of needs when it comes to displacement settings. So the fund is really tiny, and those who are operating in that sector really find a lot of challenges when it comes to securing funds and run, even sustain their projects in displacement settings. So that can also be a huge challenge to have in mind. The other one maybe to mention is the nature of displacement context. So the fact that, displacement context is for quite long has been considered as a temporal situation whereby people are moving from one place to another, and which is not, of course, practically the case, because we have seen a lot of camps and people living in displacement for quite long. This is the case of 2 refugee camps in Kenya, one being Kakuma refugee camp and Dadaab, which has been there since 1991 or 1990s. So you can imagine that period of time. So there are people who are living in displacement context for more than decades. There are those who have been born there and raised there and even dying there. So it's all about the entire life of people. But unfortunately, the approach in displacement context is more of a temporal thing, a temporal situation, and this hinder or even challenge potential people, mostly private sector, to come into that market because they're not sure about the time duration that place will probably be or stay. And the other challenge is also the fact that the future is always uncertain when it comes to displacement contexts. It's also make this market a little bit challenging, as I said, for the private sector to come in and probably expand their operation in those contexts, those setup. But maybe to touch on opportunities, of course, these places offer a lot of opportunities because for me, they are untapped markets or places. You won't find a lot of innovations, a lot of things happening. Of course, local innovations are there, local initiatives are there, but also they're limited to, because the resources are really limited. And to some extent, even the situation of the hosting community is also probably similarly the same with the refugee community. So you won't find a lot of things happening. So definitely any innovation, any initiative that address the need of the displaced people would drive into, when it comes to those contexts, because there are little things happening there. So that's a few things that I can highlight when it comes to that question, and feel free to come in and add. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just wanted to add into your kind of last point about like the magnitude of the opportunities. So it's worth bearing in mind that people really are very good at making the best of their situation, but normally, like the context we talk about, that is limited by a lack of access to electricity. So the kind of classic example we have is we call it livelihoods, but essentially it means people having businesses or running shops or kind of workshops or, making things, whatever, but kind of, doing their jobs, doing their livelihoods in order to make money and kind of like improve their situation for themselves and their families. One of the real great examples of what electricity access can do is in that kind of context. So it's for appliances or devices that make, physical work easier or, mean you can produce more. There's a really big focus in the humanitarian community about having this kind of like these kind of livelihoods approaches, what it means to have a good business, and kind of that helps people integrate better, like economically, with the rest of society. They have more money, everyone's more prosperous. So if there are kind of opportunities for designs around anything that makes work easier around like typical businesses in a settlement, that can be a real game changer, because also those people are typically the ones with a bit more money that might be able to buy something that is maybe a bit more expensive if they know that it's going to have a good kind of profit for their business. So I think there's like a huge opportunity there. Just reflecting on what you said, Sean, about the challenges as well, and something I just said is that normally, there's a range of income levels in every displacement context, but typically this is at the lower end of the spectrum, to put it mildly. So when thinking about your designs, they should be kind of inherently like low cost or lower cost. Like this is not like a premium market whatsoever. Like it needs to be affordable to people that generally don't have much disposable income, and also maybe that fluctuates. So there's lots of cool things around like financing mechanisms and stuff that make that more affordable. I'm not sure if that's like within the remit of this project, but in general, like low cost is the way to go. And just kind of like a final thought from me on this is the environment of these challenges is like, it can be really harsh. So bear in mind that if you're building something or designing something, it's not in a lab, it's not in a clean room. Like it's going to get really dusty, it's going to get covered in like mud. Like probably people aren't going to people will look after their stuff, but probably not in the way you envisage. Maybe it gets kicked around a bit, maybe someone has to move from one area to the other. So I think the nicest way of saying is like things should be robust. So when it comes to that, think about how robust your design is and make sure that it's going to last a few years, because there's lots of stories about people designing products that break after 6 months. And obviously that's terrible. It means people lose the money they invest in it. But also, it causes something called market spoilage, which is basically if you buy a solar lantern that breaks after 6 months, you then think every solar lantern is going to break after 6 months, which is not true. But, you've been bitten by this in the past. So now you never buy a solar lantern again, which is obviously bad. Anyway, my point is guarantees are great, warranties are great, but if people can't actually access them, they're just going to get upset when something breaks. So please, if you're designing something, make sure it can withstand some of these kind of physical environmental challenges. I think it's the nice way of saying it.
Brilliant. Thanks, both of you. That was really comprehensive, and I think really helpful for design as well. And I think you mentioned something about whether the economics is within the scope of the challenge, and scalability is in fact 1/4 of what the students are assessed on, and how they're able to market it. And I think some students in the past have struggled with this in humanitarian context, as you say, trying to make it affordable. And Joelle, I wanted to ask what business models you think are most promising in humanitarian contexts or settings. Would you recommend considering market-based solutions or purely subsidized models? So how would you begin to approach the pricing of design as well? I know that's quite a few questions in there. So
yeah, definitely. When it comes to market-based solution, but also subsidized model, choice between the two, I think for me, a mix of both makes sense when it comes to displacement context, because to some extent, if you come up with a market-based solution, you have to consider a few things, including costs, as Phil just mentioned, but also proximity, because the context is really complex, and you'll find people not really living together despite they're in one camp. So the proximity of your products also will make sense for people also to go for your products or even your projects. But also the other thing is accessibility, because if it's not accessible, if it's cost-wise, it doesn't make sense for the local community. Even if it makes sense when it comes to the model, which really makes sense to the need of the local community. If you don't consider the three factors, to some extent, people will fail to maybe access your products in the market, and it will be a little bit challenging for them to even enjoy what you think will make sense for them. So definitely a mix of both will make sense, but also I think one thing to also mention above and on top of everything we are talking about, in displacement context, there is no one size fits all. So you can be successful in one camp, one region, one context, but the same product doesn't make sense and it won't work in the other context. For example, even a next one, next door, and next country, for example. So to some extent, it's really important to have that in mind. In each context, or in every context, it's really important to consider mostly starting afresh with understanding of the context, for you to be able to see what to adjust, how to fix your product, and how well the product will be accessible, will be cost efficient, and also at the same time will be will reach the proximity of people for them to be able to access it. But also coming to pricing when designing or while designing, I think to some extent, especially when it comes to energy products, a lot of them might be a little bit expensive designing and costs associated to that. But I think it's also important to always have that understanding of the community you're serving, because if you're targeting the displaced community, knowing that they have limitations to income, which is not probably by choice, but by constraints such as policy, which doesn't allow them to earn something or even to work. Even working, they're not able to get a remuneration that is equal to probably their qualification or even their work. So having that in mind will give you an understanding of how well to put, to have your price. Of course, as just Phil mentioned, the situation in displacement most of the time is harsh, and thinking about long-term projects will make more sense for you to be able even to recover the cost of the design and stuff associated, or cost associated to that. Because if it's something that, or if it's a project that doesn't really last long, it will be very hard for you to get back your money that you invested, or even the time that you invested out of the projects while being in that place or in displacement contexts already. So if it's something that can last long, that means you can be able to subsidize that that product, and get eventually something, or cover the costs at the end of the day, and maybe more than what you expected, because there is that huge need. And if it's something that's really responding to the need of the local community, of the people you're serving, definitely it's something that will last. And because let me say also the other aspect, because there is limited aspect of let me say competition in the market. So as I said, the few actors are operating in those areas. So definitely your products has more potential to last long if it's really serving the need of the community. So I'm looking at, or approaching the pricing as a key factor to consider and associate mostly with how long your product will last, for you to be able to be sure that you'll recover your cost, or how do you set up the price of your item. Yeah.
Thanks, Joelle. Yeah, and I would also, I think a lot of students are not considering the full life cycle of their design and how long they estimate that a solution will last for a particular context. So really take that away with you. And yeah, that one size does not fit all. So really identify which context you want to, that you're going to identify and approach, and how you'll target them specifically. Thank you, Joelle. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but I have another question about how connected to pricing and the scalability of how you market a design for a humanitarian context. How do you reach the people that you want to impact with?
I think for me, I can, and feel free to come in. I think for me, I can think of two ways to reach people or even market your products when it comes to displacement settings. One is to pitch your product to organizations that can potentially buy in the idea and even start the procurement process and how to make sure that they can have that, because there is that aspect of in displacement context, there is that ration or even free support of items to some extent, depending on their priority and targets. So that happens, and that a way of marketing or even making sure that your products can reach the people themselves. But also the other thing is to go direct to the people. I think it's another way around whereby people can start using your products, can start interacting with your products, and they're the one now, they will be your ambassador to the organization if they need any subsidies, if they need any help, supports, because they're already convinced by the products that they want to approach organization and say, we need this and we need help. It's something that we understand that probably we can't purchase, we can't own with our own probably from our financial situation, but we need support from you, and it's something that can be also done. So I think those two ways would work, but probably eager to hear what Phil also think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. I guess I would encourage people to get creative. And I would say, within the scope of this challenge, like you probably won't be able to go to specifics of like actually how to do this, but as ideas for you that I would consider quite viable. There's kind of more traditional routes, which are getting products to people. They would, for example, some projects I've worked on in the past would have suppliers set up shops within whichever refugee settlement, so that people can access it directly. There's lots of word of mouth around a shop opening, which is very different from if it's in the town that's like 10 kilometers away. One of the kind of cooler, more innovative examples that was also very successful was the NGO that was kind of running this NG project. They hired like a theater group, like a community theater group, and they put on I think they were like plays. They did them like a series of them over a couple of like days or weeks that were all around like, I think this is about like clean cooking issues. So they would, they hired this acting group to come along and like, put on a community event so people could learn about the issues from, people in a kind of like a lot more accessible format. And then they use that to drive the sales of, a company that they were working with as well. It wasn't quite linked. It wasn't like the company ran it, but certainly like if you were thinking of a design, like having doing that kind of marketing is like it's interesting. It's like people would go along to that kind of thing. They would learn about your product and about the issues, and that was public education as well as kind of selling something that would help with that. Another example that is a bit tangential to displacement settings but still relevant. There was a project that was trying to increase the uptake of electric cooking in Kenya. And they were trying to encourage the use of electric pressure cookers, which is quite a new appliance, not really used in kind of traditional Kenyan cooking. So what they did is they found a bunch of Kenyan essentially cooking influencers and got them to do, I think, a YouTube series and make a cookbook all around how you use these electric pressure cookers to make, kind of more traditional Kenyan food in this case, and also some kind of other new recipes. And they released this like YouTube series and this cookbook online, so all about how to use a pressure cooker. And I'm thinking back into like, I'm pretty sure in like the 70s in the UK they did similar things with microwaves when they were new and exciting technologies like 50 years ago. So this stuff has been done in the past, and like I think some of this stuff can be really effective, more so than just having like posters around. Like you don't need to find out who the local theatre group in whichever setting you're looking at is, but think about these kind of other options about what could be a viable way of reaching a lot of people in one place.
Great, yeah. I'd say don't be afraid to be creative with your solution. Those sound great. And I would also say don't underestimate having a physical presence somewhere. both of you highlighted. You don't have to reach millions of people with every marketing strategy that you come up with. Sometimes it's better to really show people in person or speak to people in person. I know we're really running out of time. I don't know if we can keep you on after, but we have one question from the audience that I wanted to get to before we have to go. And it's why are more people getting displaced even though they're being provided with better solutions and access? And I don't know who can take, I don't know where this lands in technology or people. Maybe people. Joelle, do you want to take it?
Yeah, definitely happy to respond to that question, and Phil, you can come in. When it comes to, I think if I go back to the question and have it capture it very well, why people keep on moving while they're given the right solution. I think one question to ask here: who sets that standard of this is right, this is good solution, for example? I think that's where the problem starts, because an understanding of what is right, what is good, can vary from one person to the other, and that's the reason why we keep on insisting on, most of the time it's not about when developing a solution, when developing something, for example, for displaced people, you're developing for them and not for you. And it's really important to shape this in a way that will respond to their own needs, their own interpretation, their own understanding of what is good for them. And to some extent, we find a lot of, not just in display in energy response or intervention, but also in a lot of projects in the humanitarian sector, whereby people think on behalf of displaced people. People set standard, they decide what is right, what is good, while the definition of that is totally different from what is right for the displaced themselves. So I think that's one thing. But also the other thing of keeping on moving also varies and differ from one person to the other. It can be more personal thing, because there, as Phil mentioned earlier, there are a lot of causes or root causes of displacement. It can be political, it can be personal, it can be religion. So a lot of things. So because of that, you'll find that there people can't really stay in one place for quite long, because probably there are people who keep on chasing them after. There are those who can't reveal even their status, for example, because of the background of where they're coming from, for example. So there are a lot of layers, and that's why you'll find in displacement settings the level of privacy and data protection is really high, and try to be really high, because there are a lot of layers of conflict and issues and insecurity, for example. So that's why I think that can be one of the reasons why people keep on moving from one place to the other. I'm a refugee myself, for example, and I'm still a refugee, but those who can't really say that out loud, because especially when it comes to this kind of platform, because you don't know who might watch this probably after 10 years and chase you after knowing where you are, what you're doing, for example. So all of this is just a typical example of why people can hide their identity. They can keep on changing locations. They can even be sometimes skeptical to even people, or even what to open up, what to share. So those are the few things to consider. But also, going back to the first question, in this context of products and projects, it's really important to design things that will respond to people's need, and try to understand what is their need and not what you think is their need. Yeah.
Thank you, Joelle. And thank you for sharing. Okay, I hope that answers your question as well. I'm sure it did. That was very comprehensive. And we're just up with time, and I don't want to keep our speakers longer than we can, and let you all go. If you have any questions, maybe Joelle and Phil could write a short response in an email to me, and I can share it as a post resource, but I can speak to them after that. Just before you go, I just have our closing materials that I wanted to give you a feedback survey, so we can hear how you think about this new format, as well as our newsletter. So before we do that, I just wanted to launch this poll and see if anyone is now thinking about a humanitarian context or application to their design. So if you fill that out, and in the meantime, I'll just share my screen and go through those final points. So here's our short feedback survey. Please fill this out. Please fill that out, and I will put the link as well in the chat. Here you go. If you can't follow that QR code. So that'll be really helpful just for us to know how these events are going. We can keep improving them throughout the year, and hopefully just make them more suited towards you as we keep going. And I just wanted to also say a big thank you to our speakers. Thank you for joining us today. This was really useful, really helpful. And it was, I think, something that will last a long time for our students this year and future years. So thank you a lot. It's really great. I think we have 5 responses. If you don't mind, I know we're just running out of time. I'll leave that newsletter sign up and I'll close the poll so everyone can see. It looks like you all think you have a humanitarian application to your design now. So that's great to see. And I hope this webinar is really useful for you then. Maybe that's why you attended live. Thank you for coming. If you sign up to that newsletter, we have one coming out next week, so you'll receive some big news from us. Otherwise, I'll let you all go. Thank you for joining, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you to Phillip and Joelle.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone.